Don't get triggered by the term church growth. Stick with us today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. And we're going to talk about church growth. But first, AJ, I want to talk about pandas.
I know you like them. I know you're into pandas. It's just little known fact for our listening audience.
I mean, not massively.
At least today.
Pandas. Today, I'm into pandas. And there is a connection to church growth, by the way. So if you're someone who's like, why are we talking about pandas on this episode? Well, let me give you a reason. So did you know, AJ, that pandas are going extinct?
I've heard about dwindling panda populations, Scott.
Did you know that the problems are not limited to pandas in the wild, but this problem of pandas going extinct is something that they're having trouble keeping the panda population up, even in zoos. Did you know this?
They apparently, I guess, they don't like to take care of business in captivity very well.
Yeah. So you may not know this, listener, but it's actually like a well-known problem in the zoological community of trying to get pandas to mate. They just don't. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times, you can look it up, where two pandas lived together in the same habitat for 13 years before they decided to consummate their panda relationship. And there is a point to this. You would think there'd be some sort of instinctual pull to want to, as a panda, for there to be more pandas, right? But pandas seem to have this innate pull towards self-destruction. They don't have this instinct to procreate and make more. And the reason why I'm bringing this up today as it relates to church growth, AJ, as kind of a weird example of this, is we see these same sort of tendencies in churches where we're so afraid to talk about church growth. We're so afraid to talk about nickels and noses, and we don't want to have bad motivations. And I understand all of that, but it leads to this almost inverted, almost view of what we ought to be doing. And something you said before we hit record, I think is really good, and I'll steal it, which is the Great Commission is all about church growth. And so we ought not be afraid of church growth to the point where it's almost self-destructive.
Mm-hmm. It truly, the language that you hear church leaders talk about, it has almost become a taboo term, church growth. To the point where I think intentional strategies almost away from it have been deployed. It's heartbreaking. It's wrong.
Right.
So yeah, we need to talk about the positivity of church growth, recentering on the Great Commission, which we do with every church that we work with first. And then how can we do that? Of course, healthy churches, that's our thing. That is Malphurs Group to the core. For what end? To grow the church. Let's be healthy to grow the church. And so growing the church is always the end result. We want churches to thrive. We want Great Commission churches to be making disciples worldwide. And so, let's get off the church growth negativity and start talking about how can we perform to our greatest extent towards that end.
So I do want to acknowledge all of the reasons why pastors are afraid to talk about church growth, and why all of the reasons why people in church get kind of queasy around it. I do understand it. The fact that if you obsess about it and it's all you talk about, then we're getting away from discipleship. We're getting away from healthy things. But you also can't be talking about discipleship without the idea of making more disciples. And so, again, I know this may be a weird, strange example to talk about pandas, but don't be a panda church. Don't be a church that's so afraid or so averse to growing that you actually develop this sort of self-destructive tendency. And one last thing I want to mention on this before we dive into what would be some sustainable, healthy strategies for church growth that are good things and positive things. One last thing I want to say on this is it's not just about your church. We often get so zoned in on our church, but for every one church that goes, well, church growth should matter, there's another dozen or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 churches that feel that way. And if they adopt this self-destructive tendency that has downstream effects, it's in the same way. Again, I know this is such a weird example. Any one panda that doesn't care about making more pandas, maybe that doesn't matter. But when you have that problem replicated in lots and lots and lots of pandas, it leads to the extinction of the whole species. And when we have tens of thousands of churches in this country, which we do, that are averse to church growth, which we do, it's not just about that individual church. It's leading to the extinction of the church's influence in certain locations. And in the places where you don't have these sort of arguments, places around the world where no one's arguing about whether or not church growth is good or bad, the church is growing, the church is exploding, and the church's influence is growing. So it's important that we destigmatize this idea of church growth and get back to basics. And today we're going to explore 5 healthy strategies, sustainable strategies that can maybe help you get moving in the right direction.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's jump in with number 1, and that is to know where you're going first and foremost. What if we can't just start talking about how can we be a Great Commission church, a disciple making church, without really understanding that as a foundation. And what does growth look like for us? What does increase look like? And this gets into the mission and vision question in the church, the destination that we're after, the results that we're after in growing our church in a healthy way. And you have to think about that, or you're not all going to be together. You're going to end up with conflict and disappointment, disillusionment amongst at least the leadership, if not the entire church, if we don't first talk about where are we trying to go together. And you can't ask that question and have the answer be nowhere. We're here. If you've arrived, if you are doubling down on the status quo, then just hang it up today, I suppose. Toss the keys to the place to another organization that would love to jump in there and use the resources that you have. So you've got to decide that there is a different and better future, and then come to an agreement on what that looks like.
Yeah, it's so important that we talk about vision a lot on this podcast, and it's such a throwaway concept for so many churches, but it should be the furthest thing from that. You really need to know where you want to go, because you'll never endure trial and hardship and difficulty and push through and do the other things that we're going to talk about in this podcast. You'll never follow through on any of those things unless you have a real clear understanding of where it is you're trying to go. A good biblical example of this, AJ, is in the life and ministry of the Apostle Paul, who understood that, who had this vision of taking the gospel to Rome. He wanted to get to Rome, and he wanted to go there one way, but ended up going as a prisoner, right? I don't think he would have endured the shipwreck. I don't think he would have endured the trials. I think at some point maybe his will might have broken if he didn't have such a clear vision for where it was that he wanted to go, which was to get to Rome. And your church is going to collapse under the weight of hard things, because hard things come for every church. But if you don't have a clear understanding of where God is leading your church, it's not just your idea of what you want, but a real clear conviction of where God is calling your church to go. You're not going to press through any of the hard stuff if you don't have a clear understanding of where it is that God is calling your church to go.
Yeah.
So it starts there.
Yeah, I think about the men of Issachar in First Chronicles as well. They understood the times and knew what Israel should do. You have to understand the times and put forth a plan for what your church should do. It doesn't go on to say the men of Issachar determined that nothing needed to be done. Everything was fine. We understand the times, and boy, we are right on the mark.
Yeah.
So,
Or let's talk about the
yeah.
people of Israel in the wilderness, right? They lost perspective. You have the 10 spies who have lost perspective on what God is calling the people of Israel to do in entering the promised land. They're just looking at the challenges and they're thinking, maybe it'd be better to be back in Egypt with full bellies, even if we've got shackles on our hands, than to press forward. And you've got, Joshua and Caleb who go, no, God is calling us. You look at the language that they use, it's visionary language, that these people will be like food to us. We're going to be able to move forward. We're going to be able to do this thing because God is calling us into this land flowing with milk and honey, this land that was promised to our father Abraham. They have the vision in mind, and so they're able to push through the obstacles. It's no coincidence that these are the men who ultimately do lead the people of Israel into the promised land. And it's no coincidence that the people who lost sight of that vision, not a single one of those people make it into the promised land. They perish in the wilderness. Likewise, if your church does not capture the vision for where God is calling you to go, the Lord will happily hand your church off to people who get it, and allow you, and which may or may not be your congregation, right? It might be some upstart a block over. God is willing to let your church perish in service of the greater thing that he is trying to do. That's a tough word, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, even the tribes long term, none of the tribes of Israel did so well anyway, save for Judah. But okay, moving on to number 2, and that is to continually iterate your best ministries. What really works for a lot of churches, there's even niches in here that they've really struck on something that serves people well internally and externally, that they really have become drivers for them. And so you don't need to constantly be reinventing yourself. You need to constantly be iterating what you do well and what is successful and what the Lord is blessing, so that you can increase that towards greater results. Again, results set, look back at our first point, knowing where you're going. This is the case for your ministries as well. First, determine what is the ideal outcome. And then when we start to hit on something that's making progress towards that, we're constantly iterating until we get closer and closer to this desired outcome and this achieved result.
Yeah. I don't know how many of you guys have one of these in your pocket. This, which if you're listening, I'm holding up an iPhone. And if you look at this year's iPhone and you compare it to last year's iPhone, the knock, it doesn't matter which iPhone you're talking about. When you see these comparison videos, these breakdown videos, a lot of the tech folks will go, well, if you have last year's iPhone, I don't know that you really need to upgrade to this one. And there's always this sense every year when the new one comes out, people always say, well, it doesn't seem all that much different from last year's iPhone. It's not all that different. It's nothing revolutionary, right? But if you were to compare this iPhone with the one from 6 years ago or 7 years ago, you wouldn't even be able to compare it. You go, the camera is so much better, it's so much faster, it has more memory or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's a wide chasm. Any one year you look at and go, oh, well, it's not that much different. It's not that much better.
Yeah.
It's about the same as it was last year. But then when you look over the course of 5-6 years, you can't even compare them. And that's what real success looks like. And that's what real change looks like in the church. It's this relentless pursuit, AJ, of going, you know what? What's the 5% difference that we can make that's going to be better than last year? What can we do to just make this thing a little bit better? And in any one year, you might look at it and go, well, it's not that revolutionarily different from the year before. Well, that's fine. It doesn't have to be. But if you can make it just a little bit better, when you look back over 5 years or certainly over 10 years, you should be able to go, wow, I can't imagine the difference. It's so huge. A good example of this, been working with this church, and a shout out to them. Cape Carteret Baptist Church. I hope that they're listening. I know that several of them from the church listen. Now, this is a smaller time scale over the course of a year, but I've been meeting with them every month, and lots of times in our meetings, they'll go, well, is there anything that we should be doing differently? It seems like we've not really done much different from last month. But if you look at the difference between a year ago and where they are today, it's just night and day different. And the pastor there recently shared with me that I think they've had something like 80 new first-time guests in the last 2 months, which is amazing. And they actually know that because they have information on these people and they're following up with them, and they're just doing all kinds of things that they weren't hitting on all cylinders a year ago. And so in any one of my meetings with them, AJ, over the course of the last year, they maybe will go, well, there's not necessarily that much different from the month before, but they're always pushing, always doing something just a little bit better. And over the course of a year, it's night and day. You can't even compare it.
Yeah.
And that's how real change happens, just a little bit at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Little sidebar too, just you made me think, I mean, we are reaching the point in kind of the whole COVID experience in which, because a lot of places in the country still just aren't as open as others. But we are reaching that point in which a lot of people are going to come back, but new people, when churches are reopening fully, you're about to experience probably a significant guest increase, and you need to be ready for that. So that's just a little sidebar. Let's move on to number 3, Scott, and that is to relentlessly eliminate discipleship distractions. This is piggybacking off of number 2, in which we would continuously iterate well-performing ministries. Likewise, we've got to be casting off the things that would distract us from doing really great things that are fruitful and making progress. And our churches are littered with these things. Part of the work that we do in our strategic envisioning process is in the discipleship pathway portion, is having a list of ministries in the church. And we take these things physically on Post-it notes. We literally take a Post-it note that has a name of a ministry on it, like an event, a program, these kinds of things. And we stick it, where does this fit on the discipleship pathway? And in the course of this process, we talk about what exactly is this ministry. We as consultants, sometimes it's not clear by the name that they might use internally. And so it forces the team to have a discussion about, what is this? How does it work? And what does it do? And it's amazing the things that are so, I don't know, you can just tell they've been around a long time. Maybe years ago, there was some intentionality in it. And now it's just one of these things that we have. And you listener, viewer, know exactly what I'm talking about, because every church has these things. Right. Unless you have recently worked with the Malfers group and stripped away these distractions. But this is so important, because to have the resources, the bandwidth to manage things in the church is always a challenge. And we've got to be focusing our energy on the things that have the greatest productivity, and not being distracted by things that fill up our calendars and our meeting times and our money and our space, and get rid of those things that distract.
Yeah. One of the things I hear from churches a lot is, wow, all of these things that we want to do, we're excited about, and we think they're really going to drive the church forward. We just don't know if we've got the people to do it. And I remind them that they will often bring up the Pareto Principle. We got 80% of the work's getting done by 20% of the people. And I said, well, we can tackle that from 2 different directions. One is we can increase the number of people who are helping. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, actually. But the other thing you can do is reduce what comprises the 80% of stuff that needs to get done. You can reduce the scope of work that needs to be accomplished. And so a lot of times we're eating up valuable man hours, we're eating up valuable financial resources, and just attention. We don't often think about attention itself as a resource, but it is. And we're eating up those things in the pursuit of programs or ministries that are not moving us forward towards that direction, that vision, that are not producing a discipleship outcome that we want to see happen. So these are 2 sides of the same coin, these 2 different points. One, the need to constantly improve the things that are good, find that 5% better, but also eliminate the waste and the things that are just distractions from discipleship, and go, do we really need to do that potluck? I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but does it take up time? Yes. Does it take up resources? Yes. Does it take up attention? Yes. Does it drive us forward? No. Okay. Well, then why precisely are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And asking those kinds of questions and making the difficult decisions that so many churches just don't want to make.
Yeah, right. All right. Excuse me. Moving on. Number 4, build systems of care in the church. This is a real challenge, especially for a few different sort of broad brush church demographics. Um, and having this idea in our minds that the pastor, or either the senior pastor or a pastor whose actual title is only to care for people, is the way that an entire church should be cared for, is unsustainable in the context of church growth, healthy church growth, making disciples and seeing increase in the kingdom. Having designated people for care is unsustainable, lest you begin budgeting for, our largest personnel cost being care people, because how many people can they care for? We're going to have to come up with a ratio, and then our next hire is constantly adding care people. Care should be happening among the body.
Yeah, this is a challenge, I know, for so many pastors, even in smaller churches, where there's this. It can break your heart when you work so hard in church, and you're spending so much time with people in the hospital, or doing funerals or premarital counseling or whatever, the whole gamut, and it's so much to do. And anytime you hear someone say, "Well, the church wasn't there for me," the church didn't step up for me, or a family leaves because they go, "Oh, we're just not being fed," or "We didn't feel cared for," or "We didn't feel welcomed." Those things are like knives to the heart, because you know how hard you work. And I understand that. I get that. And so the solution to it is not you adding more to your plate, because chances are, if anything, you need to take some of that off of your plate. There's no more plate for you, or no more room in your plate to add things on. So when we talk about systems of care, we're talking about moving away from this organic approach to pastoral care, where you're hoping that you just see needs, that you can that you'll be able to identify them, that you'll be able to address them yourself, and instead moving to having systems of care. Because if it's all on you, or just a handful of people to notice the needs, people are going to fall through the cracks, even in a small church. Especially if you have a larger church, there's just no way you're going to be able to see all the needs. And so you need systems for identifying care needs, pastoral care needs, and a wide network of people who can help to address those needs. And AJ, I think a good way to think of this really is like triaging needs. What kind of need can be met by what kind of person? Can these smaller needs be met by these certain groups of folks? And then as a need escalates, obviously it's going to need more attention from a higher level leader. So obviously, if you've got a high school student who's killed in a car accident, you're not punting that to a small group to deal with. It doesn't care how big your church is. That's probably something that's going to land on your plate, as it should. But the Smiths are having their 5th child. Do you need to be there to visit them in the hospital when that baby is born? Probably not, right? So triage the pastoral care, and kind of meet it out and create systems for identifying what those needs are, and who you're going to assign those things to.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and our 5th point today is in the context of leadership and in church growth, and that is stack the deck. Stack the deck in your leadership development and those that are serving in these upper level capacities, so that they're truly capable of leading. Many times we end up with varying levels of people that come to be in charge of something almost by default. And there's never been true intentionality of building them up to lead well over a ministry area or a group of people. And we've got to be intentional about this, on how we build people so that they are best equipped to lead the areas of ministry they've been given responsibility for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that maybe a sports analogy is helpful here.
Of course.
For those of you who like sports. Helpful for me, maybe not helpful for AJ.
Pandas and sports in one episode.
Pandas and sport. We really, cover the gamut here. I'm a big Cowboys fan, and this season, as we're recording this, if you're listening to this as it's going live, the Cowboys are, I think, 7-2. I hope in the future this doesn't come back and bite me and they end up having just a disaster of a second half of the season. But they have players that go down. They have guys who go out and get injured or whatever. And the team's been so good that they've got a deep bench that the next guy who steps up is, maybe not quite as good as the starter, but pretty good and able to fill a gap. And the problem in so many of our churches, AJ, is that the bench is not very deep.
Mm-hmm.
And, that when one or two or three key folks step out for any reason, the ministry itself just falls apart. So we talked about systems of care, but you really also need systems of leadership development. If you're counting on your ability to develop leaders, just your ability to identify folks, tap them on the shoulder and go, hey, do you want to be in leadership position? That's not good enough, and it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. You really need systems for identifying, assessing, training, launching leaders, which is what we work on in the leadership pipeline design process that we do at the Malfors Group. That process really transforms churches, because now we're not just hinging on our ability to recruit as many people as we can identify that are warm bodies and tap on the shoulder. We're creating systems that self-perpetuate and create more and more and more leaders. More and better leaders is the language we use. So if you want to see church growth, healthy church growth, sustainable church growth, AJ, it's going to take a deep bench. It's going to take stacking the deck in your favor as it relates to leadership development. It's critical.
Yeah. I kind of have something like this going on right now. My boys and I are part of Trail Life USA, a Christian scouting, outdoor manhood, biblically based organization. And like anything else, it's always hard to get people to step up into leadership positions. And so I'm a leader, and there's several committed dads in there. But tonight we've got a couple of key leaders that are going to be out. And there's been an email thread, of who's going to be there tonight, so that, everything is covered. And that's the strain that I know a lot of our church leaders are under, is who's going to pick up if I'm not able to be there, which then puts that self-imposed pressure also, like I have to be there all the time. There is nobody else that is as deeply involved as I am. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders, and I mean, our Trail Life organization and our churches are all the same. We've got to be building this deep bench of leaders, so that on any particular Tuesday night or Sunday morning, when we know a few people aren't going to be there, that we've got the next string of guys and ladies that are ready to step in and fill this vacuum of leadership without the wheels coming off. Yeah. And this is such a stress point for church leaders. I know it is. This is where you're losing sleep and vacations and relationships, because we don't have the backup that we need. We don't have the support, the right-hand man that, we knows everything that's going on just like I do. And so that when I'm not there, man, it's cool. I can be gone that time, or, I can go on that cruise, because for that 1 week, it's okay. Right. But it's bigger than that, and it's longer term than that. So it's tough.
I think it's worth noting at this point, maybe, AJ, because we've hit the 5 things. Just to recap briefly: know where you're going, so have a vision for where you're going, not just your vision, but what you believe to be God's vision for your church.
Unified vision.
Yeah, and unified. Continually iterate on your best ministries. Always believe that there's something that could be better about even your best ministries. That's really what it boils down to, is it? Or maybe put it in the negative. Always believe that there's something wrong with even your best ministries. Don't read your own headlines and kind of go, okay, there's room for improvement, right? So always be iterating. Number 3 was relentlessly eliminate discipleship distractions. So things that are not driving you forward towards your vision and that are not producing discipleship fruit. You should get rid of those things because they zap you of human resources, financial resources, and attention. And number 4 was build systems of care. So don't rely only on the pastor, only on the paid professional Christians to do pastoral care, but have systems for identifying needs and for meeting them. And then the 5th one is stack the deck. So have systems for leadership development. You need to build more and better leaders so you have a very deep bench to address all of the challenges. Now, AJ, nowhere in that list did we say your church needs fog machines and you've got to have a particular type of ministry or style of music or preaching method. None of those things, AJ, are what drive church growth. They're just not.
That's right. Yeah.
That's not to say that smoke machines are always bad or always good. It's not. It's actually not a statement on either of those sides of things. It's just those are not the things that cause church growth. You can have smoke machines or no smoke machines and be a healthy, growing church. So I think when people hear church growth, they immediately associate it with style or certain programs or whatever. And I've worked with a lot of churches, AJ, and a lot of churches that are growing, and they run the spectrum of style. They run the spectrum of, preaching methods, of different kinds of programs, groups, approaches to all of it. There's a wide range that works.
Yeah.
These principles are the things that make the difference.
Yeah.
So I hope that encourages you if you're listening.
Fun fact about AJ, first ministry service I ever did was running a smoke machine. I'll tell you the story later, Scott.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a smoke machine runner. Push the button. That was a significant change in my life. Hey,
that's amazing.
Anyway, you've been listening
but the church you go to now, I don't think has smoke machines.
No, our main campus. Yeah, they can fog it up every now and then.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would be strict. Yeah, they're not. It's not weekly. We don't have weekly fog.
There's no weekly
fog.
My
campus definitely does not. Our small campus does not. But yeah.
My church does not have fog. At any rate, I don't know. I don't want to get sidetracked on fog. The point is, people hear church growth and they immediately assume that means a particular style.
Yeah.
And those are not the things that matter. You could have that particular style or not. It's irrelevant to whether or not you're going to have sustainable, healthy church growth, because it's the things we're talking about. It's the internal structures and mechanisms and the outlook that you have and your ability to make decisions and your ability to grow leaders and your ability to iterate. All of these things are what make a difference.
Yeah. Hey, there's even a fringe out there that think growing churches must be heretical. They must be preaching heresy to have that level of growth. And this is wrong.
That's Panda thinking.
Go get some experience in the world, folks. Hey, this has been episode 115 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're glad you were listening today. If you want to view the video version of this, go on over to YouTube. We've got a channel over there for the Malfers group. And maybe you're already watching. So if you are, look down in the video description below, because we've got a few questions that you could bring up with your staff team. And speaking of YouTube, shout out to Papua New Guinea, letting us know this week that they found the Malfers group on YouTube, and
not the whole country. There was a church.
It was
the whole nation of Papua New Guinea,
and said that they were watching. And we get that kind of feedback more and more frequently because the Malfers Group ministry is going out around the world. And we're so thankful to you for sharing and passing on things that we produce, because we want to see churches thrive no matter where you are in the world. And if you would like to partner with us in that effort, we would love to have you. So please reach out and see how you as an individual or your church could partner with us in ministry to help support the efforts that we do to bring church health around the world. We would love to have that conversation with you. Head on over to malfersgroup.com/115 to read today's article in relation to 5 sustainable strategies for healthy church growth. And Scott and I will be back again with you next week.